effective feedback is about the process and not the person. So the first thing we need to focus on here, and it is one of these 7 things we'll come on to in a moment, is when you're feeding back, it should always be about the situation and not about the person themselves. It should be about the behaviour that's been perceived in that instance, not just general behaviour from a person, because normally general behaviour is subjective, it's opinion based, whereas specific behaviour can be objective and more factual based on the back of it. So there's a little kind of explanation here. Never criticise the person, always criticise the action. If you're going to do that. Now that's the difference between seeing somebody have poor behaviour and you saying to them, right, on the, when I came in yesterday I saw you do this, and actually that behaviour then affected this and this, rather than you always come in miserable, for argument's sake. And there's a big difference between those two things. Not teaching you to suck eggs here, but it's easy to use words like always and nightmare and things like that, which again we'll come on to. So one of the worst things that you can do when providing effective feedback is let your emotions come into play. Effective feedback shouldn't be about the person, it should be about the action. So we'll talk about those emotions in a moment, but the kind of key thing that I want you to remember about this session is effective feedback should be based on the action and not the particular person or the person's long-term behaviour or personality. It should be quite specific. And if it's done properly, then poor behaviour for argument's sake, if you're trying to feedback on poor behaviour, if feedback's done properly, then poor behaviour is nipped in the bud quite quickly. If somebody's behaviour is poor constantly, it's been allowed to happen over time, that's then more challenging to change and give feedback on. Some of the 7 things that we'll go through will kind of explain that as well as we go through it. So it's about the process, not the person, and we've got to watch out for those emotions. So there's my little picture. Why does feedback go wrong? That's not me, by the way, just when I get angry. That's just, as you know, that's the Hulk. So why does feedback go wrong? So first one, emotions. Our emotions, our own emotions. Sometimes we like to give people feedback because we're annoyed. Okay? I can guarantee you, in fact, in the chat box, you can tell me right now, guys, have you ever given feedback, maybe without thinking about it, because you're wound up about something? So you've had an email and you've gone, oh, right, okay, or somebody's done something and you've given them some feedback. I guarantee you there will be people on this call that have done that. I certainly have. I got an email this morning that I started typing to give them some feedback. Aaron's put only the days that end in Y. Yeah, absolutely, Aaron, yeah. I started typing an email this morning to give somebody some feedback, somebody at the local council that hasn't been very helpful to me whatsoever, and I was about to send it before I came here and did this, and thought, let's just wait until I've been here and done this. And then I'll go back and read it again, because I think my feedback might be put in a better way to them at that point. Aaron is great for feedback. Shem, maybe you're in a hurry and can't be bothered to leave accurate feedback and leave the minimum. Yeah, again, Shem, that's a really good point as well. Feedback should be given at the appropriate time, in the appropriate place, and you should give it the appropriate length of time for a response to that feedback as well. I think that's a really good point, and it will come in, all of that what I've just said will also come into these 7 things that I'm going to share with you. Feedback isn't, sometimes we give it quickly just so it's off our head. Oh, I need to tell them this, so go and tell them, and then you can tick that box and move on to something else. The impact of that feedback on somebody might never assume the impact of feedback. It might mean not a lot to you, and also depending on your level of self-esteem as well will come into it. So if you are a confident, high self-esteem type person and somebody gives you feedback, you could potentially take it on the chin. And sometimes you will take it and then not agree with it and be okay with that. If your confidence is lower and somebody gives you feedback and it's not done in the right way, and as Shem said, maybe it's in a hurried fashion, and we haven't always thought about what the feedback specifically is, and again, these 7 things I'll share with you today should help you with all of this. That person could go away and really worry about it, and focus on only that rather than everything else that they're doing very well. Mick's just put, I learned that giving feedback in the right place at the right time is very important. The last time I gave it in the wrong place, it led to them resigning. Wow, thank you for that, Mick, and thank you for your honesty there. You're absolutely right. It's amazing. Mick, I've done it myself as a junior manager. I've given somebody's feedback and all of a sudden 2 weeks later, they're in my office really upset and they've been worrying about it for 2 weeks and I didn't give it a second thought after I gave the feedback. And that's why giving feedback is so important. And of course, what we're doing here, and I have done exactly the same as what society do, and I've kind of done it on purpose, is the moment we've started talking about feedback, we've started all assuming that we're on about hindering or negative feedback, whereas actually feedback is a descriptor, isn't it? It's a descriptor for information I'm going to give you on something that you've just done. So it can be helpful and it can be hindering, and I am going to touch on that today because helpful feedback's very important, if not more important than hindering feedback or challenging feedback or whatever you want to call it. But we do automatically go. It's the same with the word like attitude. If you say to somebody, if I said to you, I'll pick on you, Pete. If I said, Pete, I'd like to have a chat with you about your attitude. At this point, Pete doesn't automatically go, oh, that'll be great, John, that'll be brilliant, yeah, that's fantastic. Normally, what happens is we go, wow, what's wrong with my attitude? Yeah? So the point I'm making is feedback has the same thing. If you sit somebody down and say to somebody, I need to give you some feedback, automatically they will go into fight or flight mode, which we're going to talk about in a moment, okay? Another comment. Oh, there's some really good comments today, guys. Well done. Sometimes emotions are useful, especially if the person you are giving feedback to is obviously I'm disappointed, I'm upset. We've talked about this before. So let me just read that again. Sometimes emotions are useful, especially if the person you're giving feedback to is obviously, I'm disappointed, I'm upset. We've talked about it before. Oblivious. Oblivious is giving feedback. Sorry, that's me reading it too quickly. Oblivious. Yes, it can be. We've got to be difficult when we're saying I'm disappointed or I'm upset. We've talked about it before. That's more of a, this is how it's making me feel, rather than the impact of actually the task or behaviour that they're following out. So I understand where you're coming from, and if somebody has let you down, for argument's sake, then you might feel disappointed. But we just got to be really careful about how that comes across. Obviously, you know your people, and the key the key to giving a lot of great feedback is obviously have great relationships with your people, because then you can have conversations like that. But it depends how you finish that sentence. I'm disappointed because on this occasion you did this, this, and this. Or I'm disappointed because you always do X, Y, and Z. And there's a slightly different way of putting that, but it's a really good point that you bring up. So when we say, why does feedback go wrong? I'm not saying have no emotion. I'm just saying we've got to be aware of those emotions, and are they giving us the right, are they getting in the way, or are they aiding the message? That's the key thing when it comes to emotions on the back of it. Again, we'll come on to that, okay? Focus on the person, focus on the person rather than, no, that should be the other way around. Focus on the behaviour rather than the person. I completely wrote that the wrong way around. So focus on the behaviour, as in what happened in that instant, rather than what happened. If it happens regularly and it's not being picked up on, it's very difficult to sit down and say, well, you always do this. Always is a very subjective term, so we have to kind of go to the specific time and date. Okay? Sometimes it goes pear-shaped because there's a lack of clarity. We're again, it's not subjective, it's we're trying to make it objective, not subjective. So if you have lack of clarity on the feedback, for instance, it's hearsay. That's another one. When sometimes we give feedback because we've heard off somebody else that this has happened, and of course that's a Chinese whisper situation at that point. So get as much clarity as you can. Lack of communication, well, that's one of the biggest forms of things going wrong in the first place. I've lost count of how many times maybe I've had to try and give somebody feedback, and whilst giving them feedback, they've then given me a new piece of information that I didn't have before, that if I had it before, I maybe wouldn't have had to give him that feedback. So communication both ways, really. The better communication, the better feedback is as well on the back of it. And our fight response. Okay, so I just want to talk to you about our fight response, because this is one of the biggest things where feedback goes pear-shaped. Not necessarily for the person giving the feedback, but it can be, but definitely for the person receiving the feedback. Thanks, David, for the note there. Okay, so our fight response. So there's one of my favourite guys, as you know, Mr. Ali. Just make sure that this camera's recording, guys. 1 second. Yeah, we're good. Just want to make sure we're getting all this for you for the YouTube channel. Okay, our fight response then. So, what happens when we feel in some kind of threat is we go into fight or flight. Now, I'm not really... Flight, when it comes to feedback, is somebody just closing down in front of you. Okay, so you won't get a lot of response out of them. The feedback will go relatively quite well because the other person you're giving feedback to doesn't really say anything, and they'll go off. The only issue with that is they will just try and get away from you as quick as they can because they're trying to exit the situation. So that's what a flight response is, and that's not very useful. However, it will still allow you to give the feedback, whereas a fight response might not. Okay, so when we go into a fight, remember the brain can't differentiate between fear and danger. Okay, can't differentiate between the two. So, if, I've used this example with you guys before. Let's just have a check how many. Oh yeah, good, we're up to nearly 30 people again, fantastic. I've used this example with you guys before. So, if you are fearful of spiders, I mean really fearful of spiders, if a spider came into the room, you can act like a tiger has just walked into the room. Now, if a tiger walked into your room, that would be danger. If a spider comes into your room, that would be fear. It's the same fear as public speaking, for argument's sake. If you don't particularly like doing that, you start to feel sick, worried, stressed, depressed, angry, whatever it is that comes out. The point is the brain struggles to differentiate between fear and danger. So, when you are giving somebody feedback, it's kind of the chimp part of our brain takes over. And there's a few people on this call that have been reading about this recently, but the chimp part of your brain kind of takes over and it puts you into fight mode because it perceives that you're under threat at that point. And what is it that's under threat? So our basic needs are threatened and our self-esteem is threatened. Our basic needs are the need to be liked, the need to socialise, to get on with people, the need to feel good about ourselves, which links into the self-esteem. These are all basic needs that we have as human beings, some more than others, depending on your profile and all that type of stuff. But when sometimes we're giving feedback, we perceive that those things are then being threatened. And the problem is, once those things start to be threatened, we go into fight or flight. Flight we've already talked about, but in this case, fight. And we all know what happens when people start going into fight mode, especially during feedback. Well, I tell you what, you guys tell me on the chat box right now, if you're giving feedback and somebody goes into fight mode in feedback, what kind of responses are you going to get? What kind of response might you get if somebody's going into fight during giving them feedback? I'll give you a second, type something in the chat box. I'll have a swig of my machine coffee. So what kind of response? So we've got Charlotte said defensive. Shem, the person getting feedback gets very defensive. Yeah, defensive. Mick, they can shut down, not looking at you. Right, so we've got both. I like it, Pete. Dad, it's not my fault. Actually, Pete, that's a bigger one than you think. Aggressive, argumental, attack back. Okay, great. Look, guys, you've absolutely got it. We've got everything there from flight, when people shut down, all the way through to people being aggressive on the back of it. And the one that Pete said there as well, Dad, it's not my fault. If we take the dad bit out, when people go defensive, they start to blame things. They blame other people. Yeah, and Sandra's put offsetting the blame. Absolutely, and depends on the. And Shem's put depends on the personality. Yes, it will. It will also depend, Shem, not just on their personality, but also on their level of self-confidence as well. Okay, so if their level of self-confidence is low, fight, defensive, blame other things. That's the easy route out for people. If confidence is quite high, they may take more of it on the chin to go out of there as well. So. That phrase, it's not my fault, is actually quite a good response. It's not a good response, but it's a common response when people feel backed into a corner and they have to come out fighting. Now, of course, as you know, thinking, emotions, actions, results. So the moment you've got the person that you're giving the feedback into feeling defensive, the actions they're going to take next are going to give them the results that they get, okay? And normally, defensive emotions, fight emotions, generally will be hindering, which means their behaviour might not be great for the rest of the day. So if you gave somebody feedback and they get defensive, then you want them to go out in the afternoon and achieve peak performance, they may struggle to do that, which is why it's really, really important that actually one of the things that we need to try and do with feedback is make people feel better. And I know that might sound alien, but if we can make people feel better with the feedback, yeah, and sometimes we have to give people very direct feedback, don't get me wrong, and I'm not talking about sandwiching your feedback either, we'll come on to that. We all know what what the phrase is for the, let's just say, the bad sandwich. Yeah, I'm sure other people call it other names, but you can't give somebody good feedback, give them crap feedback, and then give them good feedback and think it's okay. That doesn't really work in the brain very well, even though that was a technique that was used for years, 20, 30 years ago. But if we can give people honest feedback and help them feel better, which by the way means helping them correct the feedback, not just giving them the feedback, then people are more likely to take better actions for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, and get better results on the back of it. So now we're starting to get into the crux of things here. Feedback isn't just about giving feedback, it's about giving feedback and helping that person correct that behaviour for next time. And the 7 things I'll take you through in a moment should help you with that. That's what effective feedback's all about. Okay, good stuff. Thank you for your comments. Got another one here. At my previous firm, if you had the review in the morning, it was going to be good. If you had the review in the afternoon, you should have done more. If you had the review at 4 o'clock, you better start looking for a new job. Brilliant, Aaron. I love it. That's fantastic. Do you know what? I know this sounds crazy, but whoever was running those feedback sessions absolutely knew what they were doing. They weren't using it for the right reasons. Don't get me wrong, they weren't using it for the right reasons. They were using it with the wrong intent. But I understand why they did that. I don't understand the intent behind it, because that's not really the right way to give feedback. The right reason to give feedback then. Commitment and concern for other people. So genuine concern for other people. You generally want to help them, okay? Sense of responsibility. Maybe you are responsible for certain things. There's 1 or 2 things not happen. But you also have a responsibility for people's well-being and welfare as well. So that's another reason we would generally, with positive intent, give feedback. To guide and mentor people. People regularly need feedback so you can help them. And to support and enhance somebody's performance and somebody's behaviour going on. So, again, bit of a no-brainer, but always good to remind ourselves of these things. Okay, so, For the last 25 minutes of the session then, the 7 effective qualities of effective feedback. Okay, so the 7 things here that you can take away and just ensure that you've got in place when you're going to give effective feedback. Charlotte's put, I need feedback to remind how wonderful I am. Charlotte, you are very, very wonderful. PMA. You were always a story that I tell to lots of people. Still, even now, from when I met you, there's a bit of feedback for you. But on a serious note, people do need. Oops, there goes the coffee. People do need regular feedback that's helpful as well as hindering. Okay, there you go. You just got some more, Charlotte. It is a serious point, and you know, just to and also the rest of the team. Yeah, nice one, Pete. You haven't put me, Pete, on there. What's all that about? Unless you class me as part of the team, of course, and then you'll get away with it. There are people that like that regular feedback. There are people that like regular feedback, pat on the back. There are people that need to just be saying, well done, doing a great job. All that type of stuff. Does that make sense? But it's all good stuff, to be honest. You know, I'll never get sick of saying thank you to my team. You know, sometimes they don't have to do anything in particular all day. They just do the job, and at the end of the day, I'll go, thank you for today. The amount of times they've kind of gone, yeah, well, it's what I'm paid for. Yeah, I know it's what I pay you for, but, you know, you've come in with a cheery attitude, and we've got on, even though sometimes things have been challenging, and especially at the moment. So, really, really good points. Okay, 7. Essential qualities. Okay, let's get the basics right of feedback. Number 1. Okay, so number 1 is about the basics of feedback. Okay, be specific. Have a clear focus on what the feedback is. Okay, base it on fact and not opinion. Okay, so quick example that I always use. Let's say you're in an office environment or a retail environment or whatever it may be, and you have a certain time people have to be in. Let's say it's a 9 to 5 job for argument's sake, okay? If the standard is 9 o'clock, when you come into work, the standard is 9 o'clock. You need to be, as far as I'm concerned, at your desk, ready to work at 9 o'clock. Not coming in, taking your coat off and everything else. At 9 o'clock, you are working. That is the standard, okay? Now, let's say somebody comes in late 3 times in a week, okay? You need to give them feedback on this because the standard is now being broken. The standards are the same for everybody across the board, okay? So, you can do this objectively and subjectively, okay? You can do it objectively and base it on fact, or you can do it subjectively and base it on opinion. So, at the end of the week, you call that person in objectively and you sit down with them and go, okay, just need a little chat with you. As you know, the start time that we have is 9 a.m. On Monday, you were 7 minutes late. On Wednesday, you were 15 minutes late. And today, you were 10 minutes late. Okay? The standard is 9 o'clock. So the first question is everything okay? Are you finding it difficult to live up to this standard at the moment? What is happening? Can we support you? But we can't let it go because obviously everybody needs to be in at 9 o'clock. So let's find out the reason and see if we can support you and help you moving forward. Okay? Happy days, tick a box. You've done it objectively. People can't argue with that. 7 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. This was the actual time that you came in. Objective feedback, and then you help them move forward. Okay? Charlotte's foot takes time to look this good. Absolutely. Or you could do it subjectively, where you could call them in on a Friday morning or whatever, get them in, sit them down and go, you're a nightmare, you are. You're always late. That's what subjectively feedback looks like. Okay? First of all, the word nightmare. We'll come on to that in a bit. Yeah? And always, the term always. The fact is, they're not always late. You know, they were late 3 times this week. They probably came in for 5 days, which meant that we're probably on time for the other 2. So, I know I'm harping on about this point, but the amount of times I see people give feedback, and it's not specific. It's opinion. And the moment you start giving feedback based on opinion, people will argue it with you, because your opinion will be different to somebody else's opinion. Now, you could use social proof, which for those of you that know, I've done some influencing. Influencing, by the way, is one of the sessions we're going to do in September. There's something called the 6 weapons of influence. Influencing, effective influencing, is something called social proof. So your opinion is in line with lots of people's opinion. That's what social proof is. So you might try and back it up with social proof, but believe me, the best type of feedback is specific and based on fact. It's subjective, it's objective, not subjective. Okay, so that's point number 1, make it specific. Point number 2, make it timely. Give feedback as close to the event as possible, taking into account your emotion. Okay, so sometimes somebody does something and our emotions bubble and explode. That's not the best time to give them the feedback. So you might just have to wait a little bit of time for your chemical to dissipate, so you are in a more focused mindset rather than an emotional mindset when you give the feedback. But you shouldn't leave feedback for weeks and weeks and weeks, or save it until somebody's review. The amount of times that I see that, yeah, I've got to do their review, it won't be very good, I've got loads of hindering feedback I've got to give them. I'm like, well, why are you leaving it to their review? They can't do anything with that information until their review, and if you've saved it up, it's be like a machine gun shooting them, won't it, with bad stuff. Give them feedback as you go in the most timely manner you can, okay? If anybody remembers the behavioural health and safety sessions I did this year, somebody just started recording the meeting. I don't know, I thought it'd been recorded all the way along. If anybody remembers the health and safety sessions that I did this year, the behavioural ones, or it might have even been last year, I can't remember now, it's gone so quick that everything's weird this year. We talked about immediate response to things, and that's what we really need with feedback, unless your chemicals, unless your emotions are too high, but just let them dissipate, still do it in a timely manner, really important, okay? So specific, timely, meaningful, okay? Content and precision. So make sure whatever you're saying is accurate, okay? I bet there's people on this call that have given feedback in the past and found out afterwards it wasn't accurate. Okay, we've all done it. In fact, you might have found out in the feedback when you were being told something back and the information that you've picked up is not accurate. So make sure that you've got precision and make sure you know what your content is. So what that means when you're giving feedback is a little bit of planning. You need to plan out what you're going to say. You also need to plan out what the goal is, which we'll come on to in a moment, okay? And be candid, honest, be straightforward with people, but do it with kind intent or positive intent. Look, we all know there's a difference between brutal honesty and honesty with kind intent, okay? There are some people that believe in absolute brutal honesty no matter what. And it is honest, it is being honest, but there's also honesty with kind intent, and that's just you thinking about how you're going to approach it, and approaching it in the most positive, kind way that you can for the person that's in front of you. So, essential number 1, basics, specific, timely, meaningful, and candid and honest with a kind intent. Okay? Number 2, giving feedback is goal orientated. So, when you're going to give feedback, you need to know what's the goal or output that you're requiring from the feedback. And I did touch on this earlier. Feedback, telling somebody what they've done wrong, is useless unless you help them put it right. Okay? And in the feedback session, it should always be ended with kind of a question, which we'll come on to. It's kind of number 7 at the end of this, right? Which is, so how are we going to correct the behaviour going forward? Because nobody's going to like you telling them what they're doing wrong. They will like it more if you help them try and put it right going forward. So before you give feedback, what's the goal of the feedback? Okay? If the goal is so you feel better, that's one of the wrong reasons for giving feedback, remember. That's not a feedback session. That's a, I need to feel better, so I'm going to shout at you session. Yeah? And if there's any parents on the call today, I'm sure you've all done this. Yeah? You know, there's been times when you've shouted at your children, whereas actually giving them some more effective feedback would probably have been better, but you felt annoyed at the time, so you've told them off or whatever it may be. It works exactly the same in the commercial arena in businesses. Okay, so think about what's the goal and then what's the required change of behaviour going forward. What action needs to be taken on the back of the feedback that you're giving them, because otherwise the feedback is mute. So think about times in your career where you've told somebody 3 times to do something and they're still not doing it. That tells you that the feedback sessions you're doing aren't being effective. They're not effective at the moment. What you're doing is just probably making yourself feel better by giving the feedback, unless of course that person is purposely ignoring your feedback. Which of course then is a different conversation at that point. It probably ceases to be a feedback conversation and then maybe turns into a conversation about performance, which again is a different thing. Okay, performance review is very different to giving somebody feedback. We've got a comment from Aaron here. Some people, when getting feedback, go blank, and when asked what they're going to do to change this, can't answer. Always good to have a simple idea that they can develop further. Do you agree? Yes, I do agree, Aaron. I've also got a little tip for you on that as well. So I do agree that if you have a pre-thought out goal about what output or change of behaviour in your head before giving the feedback is useful, because if they do go blank, you can then make some suggestions potentially on how they can correct that going forward. And if they go blank, they've either gone into flight or freeze, by the way, at that point. Okay. The other thing to do as well is the only danger if you give somebody advice on how to change their behaviour, it's come from you and not them, so they might be slightly less bought into it. So if they do go blank, or they do stutter, or they can't think, what I would suggest is just suspend the feedback session and ask them a question, which will come on to the end. At the end, a question like, so how could you do things differently going forward? You don't have to answer that right now. Have a think about it, and let's pick it up tomorrow or the day after. What you do at that point is you just take the pressure right off them at that point, and you allow them to go away and have a think about it. You probably allow their emotions to start bubbling down as well rather than up, so you can just take the pressure off, ask them a question, give them a bit of time to think about it, of course, unless it's business or health and safety critical, and then, to be honest, you wouldn't really give people feedback. So if something is business or health and safety critical and somebody's doing something wrong, you don't sit down and give them feedback in a timely manner. Just tell them what to do. So if the fire alarm goes off and somebody goes, oh, do you know what, I know everybody's got to leave the building, but I'm too busy, I'm staying here. Don't sit them down and go, well, how could we correct that behaviour? Because what are all the downsides of that? No. Fire alarm's going off, you get out. Yeah? So again, there's a time and a place for feedback. Business critical, health and safety critical, no. After the fact, absolutely time for feedback at that point. So yes, Aaron, you can suggest some behaviours to help people move forward, but if you don't want to do that, you can also ask a question and maybe just suspend at that point, let somebody go away and have a think. Hopefully that's useful and answers your question, Aaron. Okay, so number 2, have goals for what you're trying to achieve, not just feedback, but also the behaviour afterwards. Okay? Be specific. Just make sure. Oops, there we go. Yeah. Be specific, as we've already said. Okay. Number 3, effective feedback focuses on the future. And you can have some bonus points for whoever tells me what this is. By the way, if you can see it properly. But the point is, it's about the future. Okay. If nobody can guess it, I'll tell you what it is in a moment. Effective feedback focuses on the future, not on the past. So again, this comes in to. I need to give you some feedback because this and this has happened in the past. Thank you, Aaron. It's a flux capacitor. Well done. You got a bonus point. This is what we've done in the past, but what are we going to do in the future? That's a key thing to remember with this, okay? Give your feedback. You did X in this situation in the past. It's gone wrong. In the past, we've done X, Y, and Z. In the past, you did this, this, and this, okay? Then we have to flip it over, okay? So what will we do next time? what's the future focus on this? Okay? If you only give feedback and tell them what they've done wrong, and you might sit there and say to myself, yeah, but you know what? They should know what they should know the right way to do it. They've been here long enough. Don't assume that. Okay? And standards slip also. If I work for one of you guys and I've done something in the past and it's not been picked up on, and then I've done it again and now you've picked up on it, then there's a precedent been set already in the past. So there's going to be a fight situation there, and there's no good telling me that I shouldn't be doing that, because in my head I'll go, well, yeah, do you know what? They're just not on it this week. I might do it again. So we've got to have that future focus in there. It needs to be in there. What do we need to do differently? Okay? Number 4. Effective feedback is about the process and not the person. So again, we talked about this right at the beginning. Focus on the behaviour or the fact, not the person or the attitude. Now at this point, let's just stop here for a second. Okay? Sometimes we might feel that we need to give feedback on somebody's attitude. Okay? Now, I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. However, attitude is subjective, not objective. You can't touch attitude. It's very difficult to measure. Attitude is. It's normally somebody's opinion. If you see somebody and they do something and you think they've got a poor attitude, it's normally your opinion against their opinion at this point. So what I would urge you to do is, if you are going to give somebody feedback because they need an attitude adjustment, if you like, or you perceive their attitude not to be, let's say, on the good side of that tree or iceberg, it's on the bad side, and they've got a negative mental attitude, versus somebody like Charlotte that's got a positive mental attitude. If you're going to give feedback on attitude, you try and get as many of your ducks in the row as you can. What I mean by that is, try and look at the output of their attitude. Okay, so you can't measure the attitude, but you might be able to try and get some near factual things on the output of their attitude. So, let's say you've got a member of the team with a bad attitude. Let's say that attitude has come across to a customer, for argument's sake, okay? And the customer has complained. Then what you need to do is, when you're giving that feedback, you need to go, okay, so we've had this complaint. This is how the customer felt you came across. Okay, this is the felt behaviour. So what is it that's causing people to feel that from you? What is it that's driving your current behaviour? And how do we help change that moving forward? Okay, so attitude is a more challenging one to give feedback on. But if you can try and find the output of the poor attitude. Okay? You could also try and find the input of the poor attitude. So what is it that's causing your behaviour to be the way it is? Because remember, attitude comes out in behaviour. Yeah? But then, this is the output of your behaviour. Okay? This is what the customer thinks. This is what the customer feels. This is what your colleague thinks. This is what that department now thinks of you. Blah, 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 blah. So what is the output, and how do we then change that output, and that will then take you back to the behavioural shift that you're looking for, okay? So it is doable, a little bit more thinking about it involved, okay? I like a lot of these things. Sometimes a little bit of 5 minutes of thinking before you do these things just makes them 100 times more effective than if you just kind of go, oh, I've got a bad message to give somebody, let's get them in here and get it over and done with. Yeah, if we can think about these things, it just makes things more effective for not only you as the person delivering the feedback, but also the person receiving the feedback as well. Okay? Focus on the situation, not all. That comes back to using the phrase always and things like that. Don't use words like always and nightmare. Okay? So one thing that we do like to do in our human brains is exaggerate things sometimes. Okay, so try to steer away from exaggeration. It's like the word nightmare. I've mentioned it a few times. Yeah, you might not even call a person a nightmare, but when they come in, you can go, look, when you do this, it's like a nightmare. Well, it's not a nightmare. There's nobody in cold sweats. There's no zombies. There's no drowning. There's no whatever your nightmares are. So just be aware of the exaggeration we use sometimes when we're giving feedback. And of course, words like always. Well, you always do this. Well, that's a terrible, terrible bit of feedback. Because the likelihood is if they come into work for 100 days and do the thing that you don't want them to do for 99 of those days, and one they didn't, then they haven't always done it. Okay, always is very encompassing. So just bear that in mind when you're giving feedback there, okay? So, and remember, it's about the process, it's not the person. Okay, you can give feedback on attitude, but look for the output of that attitude and then try and work back what the change of behaviour you need, and try and stay away from exaggeration and words like always and nightmare. Okay? People can't change who they are, but they can adapt their behaviour. Okay? So, if you go back to all the work that I've done on personality profiling, there are certain types of people, there are certain personalities, and you could argue, can people change who they are? Yes, they can adapt their behaviour. Are you actually going to revert and actually change completely the person you are? It does happen, but in very rare cases, in all honesty. So the point I'm trying to make at here is don't attack the person, attack the behaviour. Because if you attack the behaviour, people can adapt their behaviour. If that person feels like their person has been attacked, there's nowhere for them to go. They can't get out. There's no move for them, but they can adapt behaviour. So go for the behaviour and not for the person. Okay? Number 5. Oh, no, we've got a bit of a ditty here. I know this is wordy, but I put it in because I thought it might work quite well. So praising effort is another easy trap to fall into. You may think that you're making things better by putting a positive spin on the situation. But according to Harveston, complimenting effort after a failure only makes people feel stupid, but also leaves them feeling incapable of reaching their goal. So again, a bit wordy for you. However, what this crap sandwich that I talked about earlier doesn't really work. If anybody's not heard of this crap sandwich before, what it is you get somebody in. You get somebody in to give them some feedback, you give them some good feedback, you give them some crap feedback, you give them some good feedback, and expect them to go off and be happy because the bad feedback's sandwiched in the middle. It doesn't really work, because people will go into fight, and that emotion is higher than the praise that we give, okay? So if you're going to give somebody some hindering feedback, or challenging is a better word, okay? So I don't like negative and I don't like hindering when it comes to feedback. Maybe challenging feedback, that's okay. Challenging does something different in the brain than negative. Okay, if it's a challenge, the brain starts to look for a route to take the challenge. If it's negative, the brain starts just to go into a negative format. So just bear that in mind as well, okay? So if you're going to give somebody feedback, give them the way it is. But also, we've got to give some praise feedback, which we'll come on to in a moment, okay? Number 5, effective feedback isn't afraid to be challenging. There you go, there's the word challenge, okay? Plan what you're going to say. Keep it simple and direct. Do it regularly and make a habit. In turn, people will respond quicker, better, faster. So when you see feedback, do it in a timely manner, okay? It's like a little guy, if you're having to push that ball up the hill, if you're doing it regularly, they'll keep pushing until you get to the top, and then it starts rolling down that hill, okay? And it's okay that feedback is challenging. Some challenging feedback is some of the best feedback people can have, okay? But the reason that you can make it challenging and not negative is that you tell them what's not right, and then you help them correct the behaviour, remember. That's the key thing here, okay? Excuse me. Effective feedback can be positive. So, all the way through the session, we've talked about hindering, challenging, negative feedback. Giving positive feedback is just as important, okay? Celebrate success. You guys know I bang on about this all the time. Give somebody regular feedback for doing a great job, because they need that. It will build them. Likewise, if you give them regular, positive, helpful feedback, it also gives you the ability to give them some challenging feedback when you need to. So it's not about being all happy, clappy, everything's wonderful all the time, but notice when people are doing things right, as well as notice when people are doing things wrong. Okay? How many people go out in their day and purposely notice people doing things right? Because there are people in the world that will notice how quickly do people pick up on something if you do something wrong. It can be like that, can't they? Oh, they've made a mistake there, blah, blah, blah. Rather than going, do you know what? I'm going to go and notice a few people doing things right today and give them some feedback on it. So there's a little tip. Maybe it's a little action you want to take away for today. Why don't you go away from today and notice people doing something right? Yeah? Mick's put thanks for my email today. Question mark? Not quite sure what you mean there, Mick. Maybe you can tell me in the last minute. The point is, just go and see if you can notice people doing things right for the day. And maybe giving them a bit of positive feedback, okay? Reinforce and promote the good, celebrate success, as I've said. Positive feedback stimulates the reward centre of the brain. Makes people feel very, very good when you give them some positive feedback. It stimulates the reward centre, the bit that makes it worthwhile, okay? So that's why it's really important. So I wanted to harp on about that for a minute, because obviously we always talk about giving challenging feedback. And the last one, to finish you off today. Effective feedback doesn't assume it's right. Don't assume the feedback that you're giving people is correct. You need to make sure it's correct. Okay? Make sure you've got your facts. Check your own ego first. Make sure you're not just thinking you're right. Just because you've done it that way for a long time doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do things when you're giving feedback. Check your own emotions are in place, which we've talked about. Earn and trust and respect. If you can get to that level of relationship with somebody, it's easier to give feedback. So we did some positive feedback, only notice when things don't. Positive feedback, only notice when things don't go. Oh, right, technology. Sorry, Mick, right now I've got you. Okay, great. If you build a relationship with somebody, and on previous sessions we've done relationship building, I think that's already on the YouTube channel. There's 6 levels of relationship: acknowledge, understand, accept, trust, respect and bond. Okay? If you can get your people to a level of trust and respect, if you've got that deal, if you've got that level of relationship with your team in the workplace, people are more likely to hear you out when you have some challenging feedback. So ultimately, the easiest thing to do, not easiest, the best thing to do in order to be able to give challenging feedback is to build great relationships with people, and do the other 7 points on here, and you'll find that your feedback becomes more effective. And finally, last point before we finish, when you've done the feedback, as Aaron stated earlier on, if that person can't think or freezes at the moment, ask them a question to go away and think about, and the question is, so you've had the feedback, how might you do things differently next time? Remember, how might you do things, not how will you do things. Change of question. One question focuses the mind, the other one engages the imagination. This one, might, engages the imagination. How might you do things differently? Why don't you go and think about that? We'll have a chat about it tomorrow. Okay. So, hope you enjoyed that. 7 different things to take away there with giving effective feedback. And remember, maybe today, why don't you go out and look for and try and catch people doing things right and give them a bit of feedback, as well as if you've got to give some challenging feedback, maybe take 1 or 2 of those things away and it'll help you do so. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the session. No worries, thanks Pete. If you've got any feedback, drop it in as always, and I'll see you in 29 minutes if you're on the next session, and that one is about what opportunities we can take and how we take them from the last kind of 10-12 weeks. Bye for now.